mocked in the showers. Moments later, they realized she was their SEAL commander. The sound of disrespect. The shower room echoed with steam and arrogance. Tile walls, white and cold, reflected the laughter of men who believed no one above them was listening. Water struck the floor in uneven rhythms, like bullets that had forgotten their mission. The air smelled of soap, metal, and the kind of confidence only untested soldiers carry. It was 5 hours, and discipline had not yet woken up. "Can you believe it?" one of them said, lathering his hair and shaking his head. "A woman in our unit. The brass has lost it." Laughter rolled through the steam like a wave of cheap courage. Someone else added, "They'll give her a desk in a week, or maybe a medal for surviving the locker room." The words bounced off tile, growing bolder with every echo. At the end of the row, one man stayed quiet. He rinsed his face slowly, keeping his back turned to the rest. He'd seen arrogance before. It always sounded the same before breaking. "You don't say much, Morales," one of the louder voices called out. "What's wrong? Scared she'll outrun you?" Morales didn't answer. He just turned off the water, grabbed his towel, and walked out. Silence followed him briefly, then collapsed under another round of mockery. In the corner, a woman stood unnoticed behind a partition wall, half in shadow, half in the reflection of their own foolishness. She wasn't hiding. She was listening. Her name wasn't on their lips yet, but it was already on their orders. Later that morning, the same men stood in formation on the training field, boots sinking into damp soil. The early sun cut thin lines through the fog, illuminating every patch of mud they would later be punished to crawl through. They were restless, joking under their breath, expecting another briefing about weapons inventory or tactical formations. Then the door of the command hut opened. The sound that followed wasn't footsteps. It was authority disguised as silence. She walked out wearing the black and grey fatigues of the SEAL command unit, hair tied back, eyes sharp enough to cut through habit. Her face held no expression, only purpose. The air around her changed before she even spoke. The men straightened instinctively, as if the air itself had given the order. She stopped at the front, hands behind her back. "Good morning, gentlemen." Her tone was calm, low, the kind of voice that didn't need to shout because the truth in it already did. They answered out of reflex, voices uneven. "Good morning, ma'am." Her gaze swept across them one by one until it stopped on Morales, the only one who could meet her eyes without flinching. Then she spoke. "My name is Commander Reyna Cross. I was assigned to lead this unit 3 weeks ago. Some of you think that means you'll be tested. You're wrong. It means you'll be exposed." A ripple of discomfort crossed their faces. "I know every file in this unit," she continued. "I know who you were before the uniform. I know who hides behind humor. I know who freezes under pressure. And I know who listens when everyone else laughs." Her words landed like weight on their spines. Behind her, the assistant commander unfolded a clipboard. He was about to read the new operational objectives when she lifted her hand. A gesture so small it froze the field. "Before we talk about missions," she said, "we're going to talk about discipline." Her gaze moved again, stopping on one face, the same man who had made the locker room joke about medals. He felt the color drain from his skin. "Corporal Hayes," she said. He stiffened. "Yes, ma'am." "You think humor builds trust, do you?" He blinked. "Ma'am, you think this is still a game?" His throat tightened. "No, ma'am." She took a slow step forward. The sound of her boots on gravel was louder than the laughter from earlier. "Yesterday," she said softly, "you were in the showers. You spoke about me." Silence hit the field like a storm. Every soldier froze. Time, sound, even breath. Hayes's lips parted, but no sound came out. He didn't know if she was guessing, or if someone had reported him, or if she had simply known, because some people just know. She stopped right in front of him, close enough that he could see his own reflection in her pupils. "I'm not here to punish you," she said. I am here to make sure you never forget what you sounded like when you thought no one important was listening." Then she stepped back and looked at all of them. "The Navy didn't put me here because I'm a woman. They put me here because I finished training that killed better men than you. I earned the same scars, the same silence, and the same right to command. And before you ask, yes, I showered in the same mud, bled in the same dirt, and crawled under the same fire." The wind moved across the field, as if even it was ashamed to interrupt. Then she said something they would remember for the rest of their careers. "You don't have to respect me because I'm your commander. You'll learn to respect me because when the mission starts, I'm the only one who'll get you home." Morales tried not to smile. He'd seen this before, the moment when arrogance meets its teacher. Commander Cross turned, facing the horizon. "Training begins in 5 minutes. You'll be running in full gear. Every insult you've ever spoken, every laugh, will add another mile. You'll stop when your body forgets who you mocked and remembers who you follow." No one moved. "Move!" she barked. Boots hit the ground. Mud flew. Discipline returned. And as they ran, breath burning in their chests, something inside them began to change. Not out of fear, but out of recognition. The woman they mocked in the showers had just rewritten the definition of command. By noon, when they collapsed by the field tents, the laughter was gone. Only silence remained, heavy, raw, instructive. Commander Cross watched from a distance, her hands folded behind her back, her expression unreadable. Morales walked up to her, saluted. "Permission to speak, ma'am." She nodded. "Did you always know they'd talk like that?" She glanced at him, faint smirk at the corner of her mouth. "Always. The question was, how long until they listen?" He nodded slowly. "And when they do?" Her gaze returned to the men, now silent, learning humility. "Then," she said, "we start the real war, the one against who they were before they knew me." The sun was already high when the first drill began. The men stood lined up on the training field, faces streaked with sweat and disbelief. Commander Reyna Cross walked in front of them, silent. Her steps measured like clockwork, ticking through nerves. No one spoke, no one dared. Even the sound of boots shifting in the dirt seemed loud. She stopped, turned, and scanned the line. "Today," she said, "you will stop being soldiers who perform. You will become soldiers who decide." The air vibrated with her calm authority. "You thought discipline was about posture. It's not. It's about awareness. It's about knowing that arrogance wastes oxygen." Her tone wasn't cruel. It was surgical. Every word cut something useless out of them. They were still unsure how to respond to her, still balancing on the edge between shame and respect. The whistle blew. The drill began. It wasn't a normal obstacle course. It was designed to break rhythm, to test reaction, to demand silence when the body wanted noise, mud trenches, razor wire, moving targets. They ran, crawled, climbed, fell, and rose again. Their lungs screamed. Their minds replayed her words, and every time someone hesitated, her voice cut through the chaos, low and exacting. "Decide faster. Think quieter. Move with purpose." She didn't shout. She didn't need to. The silence that followed her commands was louder than any scream. Halfway through the course, Corporal Hayes stumbled. His leg caught on a wire, tearing skin and ego alike. Morales reached for him, but Cross's voice stopped them both. "Don't pull him up. Ask him what's heavier, pain or pride." Hayes gritted his teeth, trying to stand on his own. "Pain, ma'am," he gasped. She shook her head. "Wrong. It's pride. Pain heals when pride stops pretending it matters." He stood, limping but upright. No one laughed. Not anymore. At the far end of the field, a cluster of officers observed. Their conversation was casual at first, another evaluation, another leader. But as they watched her command without force, they fell silent. One of them leaned forward and whispered, "She doesn't motivate them. She exposes them." Another nodded. "She's building endurance, not obedience." Reyna could feel their eyes on her, but she didn't acknowledge them. Her focus was on her unit, her soldiers, her mirror. By late afternoon, thunder gathered over the mountains. The storm rolled in with the slow confidence of something inevitable. The wind thickened, carrying the smell of rain and ozone. Cross called the drill to a halt. "Weapons check," she ordered. "Form perimeter." The men obeyed instantly. Something new in their movement, less mechanical, more deliberate. They were learning rhythm through restraint. But before the inspection was complete, a static burst crackled through the radio on her shoulder. A voice came through, sharp and urgent. "Unscheduled test commencing. Sector Delta, command authorization unknown." She froze. Unauthorized drills weren't part of training. She turned to her second-in-command, Lieutenant Greer, who shook his head. "Not from us, ma'am. This came from outside the chain." The thunder cracked again, closer. From the tree line, smoke rose, not from lightning, but from detonation. The men looked at her instinctively. Orders, direction, clarity, everything that hierarchy demands in moments of chaos. Reyna's mind split into two precise tracks, one listening to the storm, the other mapping probability. "This isn't an exercise," she said. "This is sabotage." Morales glanced toward the smoke. "Enemy?" She shook her head. "Not yet. Someone wants to see how we react." Her eyes sharpened. "Let's show them." The rain began in sheets, drumming against their helmets as they moved out. The unit advanced low through the mud, visibility near zero. The smell of cordite and wet earth filled their lungs. Lightning lit fragments of their faces, determined, alert, silent. Cross led from the front, her movements deliberate, controlled, every step a command unspoken. They reached the perimeter fence. Beyond it, an unmanned vehicle burned, its metal frame twisted. Nearby, a small transmitter blinked in the dirt. She crouched beside it, water streaming down her sleeve, and wiped away the mud. A SEAL insignia flashed briefly on the screen before it shorted out. Not theirs, not Navy. Someone was testing boundaries. Someone wanted a reaction. "Secure the area," she said. "Morales, Hayes, flank north. Greer, get the comms back. I want eyes on the grid." She turned back toward the fire. For a second, her reflection flickered in the flames, calm amid violence. Hayes limped past her, rifle up. Their earlier mockery was gone, only trust remained, raw and unspoken. They had laughed at her in the showers. Now they followed her through fire. When the first echo of movement came from the tree line, they didn't flinch. Figures in dark suits moved low, testing defenses. Cross raised her hand. "Hold," she whispered. The men froze. The rain swallowed their breath. Then a second later, motion sensors triggered, alarms screamed, and the field lights cut through the rain. The figures scattered, caught off guard. One slipped, fell, fired once. The shot tore through the storm like lightning, grazing a wire and cutting through Greer's arm. Reyna moved before thought could catch up. She dragged him down, returned fire, 3 controlled bursts. One target dropped, the others retreated. "Medical kit," she called. Hayes slid through the mud, tossed it. She pressed gauze to the wound, firm and calm. "Stay with me, Lieutenant." His eyes flicked between pain and disbelief. "Who the hell are they, ma'am?" he hissed. "Ghosts," she said, "but ghosts don't bleed." She nodded toward the fallen figure. "Bag him." When they rolled the body over, the insignia was visible even in the stormlight, SEALs, their own. The silence that followed felt heavier than the rain. Morales looked at her, waiting for explanation. Cross stared at the mark on the uniform, her jaw tightening. "This was a loyalty test," she said. "Someone up there wants to see if I'll break when my own turn their weapons inward." She stood, drenched, rain streaking down her face like something purifying, not punishing. "They'll get their answer," She gave the next orders like vows. No one speaks of this, not yet. We report nothing until we know who authorized it. Strip the weapons, clear the field, secure the evidence. We will finish the drill, gentlemen, because nothing insults an enemy more than calm completion. Her tone carried no anger, only precision. That was what unnerved them the most. She didn't raise her voice. She raised the standard. By the time they returned to base, night had replaced the storm. The lights flickered once and steadied. Inside the debrief tent, the men sat drenched, exhausted, but alert. She entered last, the flap closing behind her like the final punctuation of a lesson. "Today," she began, "you learned that disrespect is weakness. You also learned that trust is earned when chaos doesn't change who you are." She paced slowly in front of them. "Tomorrow, we find out who sent that test. Until then, you'll remember what I said. Discipline isn't posture, it's presence." No one moved. No one dared break the silence that followed. She walked to the table, placed her soaked cap down, and looked at Hayes. "You can laugh again one day, Corporal, but not until you learn what your laughter cost." "Yes, ma'am," he whispered. As she left, Morales called after her softly, "Ma'am, if they were ours, what does that mean for us?" Reyna stopped in the doorway. Her silhouette cut through the light like a story between two endings. "It means we're not a unit yet," she said. "We're a mirror. And mirrors don't lie. They just show you who you are before the mission begins." Then she stepped out into the rain again, unafraid of what waited in the dark. The storm had quieted, but the echo of her words remained, circling the men like something sacred. That night, while the base slept, she walked alone across the wet field, past the scorch marks, the mud, and the place where betrayal had nearly become tragedy. She crouched by the burnt grass and ran her fingers through the ash. It clung to her skin like a reminder. Above her, thunder rolled once more, distant now, fading like an apology. She whispered to no one, "They'll learn." And the storm, respectful this time, didn't interrupt. The interrogation room smelled of cold metal and dried rain. A single bulb hung overhead, swaying slightly, making the shadows breathe with each movement. Commander Reyna Cross sat still, hands folded on the table, uniform clean but damp around the edges, like she had come straight from the storm instead of sleeping through it. The officer across from her was older, polite in the way predators are when they're not hungry yet. "Commander," he began, "you led an unscheduled engagement yesterday." His tone was measured, distant. "You used live rounds. There were casualties." She didn't move. "There was sabotage." He adjusted his glasses. "And yet your report states you neutralized a threat without authorization." Her voice was calm, steady as a heartbeat. "Authorization was lost the moment our perimeter was breached." He leaned back, studying her like a riddle that refused to solve itself. "You do understand what this looks like?" "Yes," she said softly. "Efficient." He smiled without warmth. "You've made enemies, Commander. Some of them wear stars on their collars." She didn't reply. He tapped the folder in front of him. "You were tested, and instead of failing quietly, you succeeded publicly." He closed the folder. "That's dangerous." Reyna met his gaze for the first time. Dangerous for who? The question hung in the air, heavier than accusation. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. They both knew. The test had been designed to make her break, to prove that leadership was instinct, not gender, not myth. But she hadn't broken. She'd proven that authority wasn't noise. It was silence that didn't flinch. In the observation room behind the glass, Morales and Hayes watched in uneasy silence. They'd volunteered to give statements, both insisting on staying. A junior officer asked them to wait outside, but Morales shook his head. "We were there," he said. "We're not leaving." Hayes added, quieter, "She's the reason we're alive." Inside the room, the older officer sighed. "You think loyalty will save you, Commander? The Navy loves loyalty until it costs them convenience. Reyna smiled faintly. Then I'll be inconvenient. He stood, pacing slowly, his boots echoing across the small space. I've read your file. You were decorated, then demoted. You disappeared for 2 years. No one knows where you trained. You came back with recommendations signed by ghosts. His voice lowered. Tell me, Commander, who trained you? She didn't blink. War. The simplicity of her answer unsettled him. War was not supposed to have a voice that soft. He studied her again, then turned toward the mirror. Cut the feed, he said. The light flickered once and went dark. Morales felt his chest tighten. Through the glass he could see their silhouettes. 2 shadows, one standing, one seated. What's he doing? He whispered. Hayes leaned forward, fists clenched. He's testing her again. Inside, the silence changed shape. The older man placed both hands on the table and spoke quietly. They want me to break you. They want a headline that says Commander fails psychological integrity test. She tilted her head slightly. Then you'll disappoint them. He stared at her, then exhaled. You remind me of someone. Someone who obeyed, she asked. Someone who refused to. He straightened, rubbing his temples. You don't make this easy. Neither does truth. He paused, then unexpectedly asked, What do you tell your soldiers when they doubt you? Reyna looked past him, toward the dark glass that hid her unit. That command isn't about being believed. It's about being followed when belief fails. For a moment, the room was silent again, not hostile, not warm, simply true. The kind of silence that both sides respected. When the lights came back on, the interrogation was over. The officer gathered his files. You'll receive a temporary clearance suspension pending review. He hesitated before adding, For what it's worth, Commander, I don't think you're wrong. But the people above me, they're not the ones in the mud, she finished. He nodded once, quietly. No, they never are. As Reyna left the room, Morales stood at attention. Hayes followed, saluting her in a gesture that meant more now than any apology could. She stopped in front of them. They'll try to separate you from me, she said. Don't let them. Morales frowned. Ma'am, are we under review too? You're under observation, she replied. Every soldier always is. The difference is whether you notice. Outside, the rain had stopped. The air felt new, like the world had been rinsed clean but left undecided. She lit a cigarette, one of the few habits that refused to die. Hayes looked uneasy. Permission to speak freely, ma'am. She nodded. You think this was just a test? No, she said, exhaling smoke that vanished before it reached the wind. It was a rehearsal. Back at the barracks, tension coiled like wire. Soldiers avoided eye contact, whispering about investigations, about how long she'd last, about whether command would replace her quietly. But Morales noticed something different. The laughter was gone. The arrogance had burned off like fog. In its place was caution and respect. That night, Reyna sat alone in her quarters, the door slightly open, letting the sound of boots and low conversation drift in. On her desk were 2 things, the damaged transmitter from the sabotage site and a folded letter marked with the Navy insignia. She hadn't opened it yet. Some truths had to wait until they were earned. She touched the transmitter, fingers tracing the burn marks along the metal. The device had been custom-built, military tech, but unregistered. There were initials etched into the casing, CL. It meant something, she just didn't know what yet. Her radio buzzed. A low voice came through. Commander Cross, go ahead. Intel from HQ, Mom. They found a data breach. Someone accessed the personnel files from your old unit, the one before your disappearance. Reyna's face hardened. Who? The voice hesitated. Classified source, Mom. But they used your clearance codes. She closed her eyes, leaning back in the chair. The storm outside had ended. but a different one had just begun. "Copy that," she said quietly. "Lock everything down. No one gets near my men until I say so." When the line went dead, she looked again at the unopened letter. For a moment, she thought she heard laughter again, faint, ghostly, the echo of that first morning in the showers. She smiled without humor. "You should have learned," she whispered. She tore the envelope open. Inside was a single line, handwritten in ink that looked rushed. "You were never meant to command them. You were meant to destroy them." She stared at the words until the paper blurred. Then she stood, grabbed her sidearm, and headed for the corridor. The hallway lights flickered as she passed, one by one, like the base itself was deciding whether to warn her or hide her. Morales saw her coming and stepped forward. "Ma'am, what's happening?" "Nothing yet," she said, voice sharp as wire. "But when it does, I need you ready." "For what?" "For the truth to stop being polite." She walked past him, down toward the armory, where the scent of oil and metal felt like certainty. She placed the letter on the table, beside a row of weapons polished to precision. "You wanted a test," she murmured, half to herself, half to whoever was listening. "Now you will see what I learned in the years you can find on file." Outside, the wind rose again, lifting dust and whispers alike. The base lights dimmed. Somewhere in the distance, a door slammed, the sound final, decisive, like the world had just agreed to another round of war. And Commander Reyna Cross, the woman they mocked in the showers, began preparing to fight an enemy that wore her own face. The armory lights flickered when Commander Reyna Cross entered, the hum of electricity vibrating like a warning too faint to name. Rows of rifles gleamed in metal silence, each one marked, numbered, trusted, unlike the people behind the latest orders. The letter sat open on the table beside her, its single line burning in her mind like a match that wouldn't go out. "You were never meant to command them. You were meant to destroy them." She read it again, slower, letting every word dissolve until only intent remained. Someone was rewriting her story from the inside. Outside, the base slept uneasily. The storm had passed, but its echo still crawled through the air ducts. Morales stood watch near the barracks, shoulders tense, pulse synchronized with the rain's memory. He didn't understand the politics of command, but he knew the rhythm of danger. And something in the night was off. The way power cables hummed too loud, the way silence leaned forward instead of back. At 200 hours, the emergency alarms cut through the dark, shrill, and absolute. The intercom blared static before words. "Unauthorized activation detected. Armory lockdown in progress." Morales ran before his mind caught up, boots striking the wet pavement, heart burning through fear. When he burst through the door, he saw her already moving, calm, deliberate, loading rounds into her sidearm, like someone reloading conviction. "What happened?" he demanded. "They're coming for the evidence," she said, nodding to the transmitter still on the table. "The breach wasn't digital, it was physical. Someone's inside the compound." He scanned the room. "Our men?" Her eyes didn't move. "If they were, you wouldn't be asking." The overhead light flickered once, twice, then died. For a second, the room was only breath and darkness. Then the backup generator kicked in, washing everything in red light, the color of emergency, the color of truth. She moved to the control panel, inputting a manual override. "We're sealing this sector," she said. "No one in or out until I say." Morales nodded, gripping his rifle tighter. "Ma'am, who would come for you here?" "Not for me," she said, turning toward the door. "For the past." By 0240, they had tracked movement near the eastern corridor, the old maintenance wing that hadn't been used in months. Hayes, arm still bandaged, volunteered without hesitation. "You shouldn't even be standing," Morales said. "Neither should she," Hayes shot back. Reyna didn't stop him. The three of them moved through the hallway in silence, weapons low, eyes tuned to corners. The hum of the bass seemed to follow them, heartbeat for machine and human alike. When they reached the corridor's end, the air grew colder. The metal walls carried moisture, condensation dripping down like sweat from the structure itself. Morales pointed his light down the narrow passage and froze. The Navy emblem on the far wall had been painted over, but beneath the peeling layer of grey, faint letters still showed through. GU 47. "What's GU?" Hayes whispered. Reyna's jaw tightened. "Ghost unit." She stepped forward, fingers tracing the faded paint. It was a covert division during the early years of the Second Gulf operations, officially dissolved, unofficially repurposed. Repurposed for what? Psychological field conditioning. They built soldiers who could operate without conscience, without pause. But the program collapsed when the side effects became uncontrollable. Hayes swallowed. Side effects? Identity erosion, dissociation, perfect obedience. Morales looked between them. "You trained with them?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The silence was admission enough. They moved deeper into the wing. The air tasted of oil and dust. Old lockers lined the walls, some half open, uniforms inside still bearing names long erased. One of them caught Morales' flashlight, CL. He froze. "Ma'am," he whispered, pointing. She stepped closer, the initials from the transmitter, the same handwriting etched into the metal tag. "Cassidy Lawn," she said under her breath. "He was my commanding officer during GU development." "He's dead, right?" Hayes asked, though he already knew the answer. Reyna's lips pressed into a line. "That's what the file says." As if summoned by memory, the sound of boots echoed behind them, measured, deliberate, not hurried, but hunting. They turned, weapons up. A shadow emerged from the red gloom. Tall, built like time itself had kept him fit. He stepped forward, hands raised, calm as if entering a prayer. "Stand down, Reyna," he said. "You're not supposed to be here." She froze, the voice digging into memory. "Cassidy." His face was older, scarred, but the eyes were the same, grey, unwavering, confident in their own logic. "You were never meant to find this wing," he said. "We shut it down for a reason." "You mean you buried it," she replied, "along with the soldiers who stopped being useful." He sighed almost kindly. "You still think this was about cruelty. It was about preservation. You were built to lead missions others couldn't. You were trained to erase hesitation, to make decisions without conscience slowing you down." Hayes shifted uneasily. "You're saying she was part of the experiment?" Cassidy smiled faintly. "She was the experiment." The words hit the hallway like gunfire. Morales took a step closer to her, as if presence alone could shield what that meant. Reyna's eyes stayed on Cassidy. "You turned soldiers into mirrors," she said, "and when you looked at me, you saw your own failure." He shook his head. "No, Reyna, I saw perfection. That's what scared them. You learned to choose when to hesitate. You made mercy tactical. That wasn't in the design, because you built weapons, not people." He took another step forward, lowering his voice. "They want me to bring you back in quietly, but I'd rather not drag your men into this. You think I'll just walk away?" "I think," he said, "you still care more about protecting them than punishing me." Her silence confirmed it. Hayes raised his rifle. "You don't get to rewrite her story." Cassidy didn't even flinch. "You think she needs your defense? You don't understand. The Ghost Unit wasn't made to follow. It was made to survive leadership collapse. She's what happens when obedience learns empathy." Morales glanced at Reyna, but she was no longer listening to Cassidy. She was listening to something else. A faint mechanical click in the vents. Her eyes narrowed. "Get down." The explosion was small but surgical, an incendiary charge meant to erase evidence, not kill. Fire tore through the far end of the corridor, smoke filling the air in seconds. Morales grabbed Hayes, dragging him toward the exit. Reyna moved last, shoving Cassidy aside as debris fell. Alarms screamed again, this time real. They broke through the side hatch, lungs burning, sirens wailing overhead. The night outside glowed orange where the ghost wing had been. Cassidy stumbled beside her, coughing. "You just destroyed the only proof of your past." Reyna looked at him, face streaked with soot. "Then I guess we start writing a new one." She motioned to Morales. "Get the men out. Lock the perimeter. No one gets in without my say." Hayes limped forward. "And him?" he asked, nodding at Cassidy. Reyna stared at her old commander. The man who built the machine she learned to dismantle from within. "He stays," she said, "until I decide if he's part of the wreckage or the reason." Cassidy smiled through blood. "You haven't changed." "No," she said. "I just stopped obeying ghosts." The fire behind them roared louder, devouring secrets that had lived too long in darkness. And as the wind carried the smoke toward the sea, Reyna Cross realized that the only thing more dangerous than remembering was the world finally starting to believe her. The fire had finally died by morning, leaving behind the metallic smell of burned circuitry and truth. The ghost wing was gone, erased down to concrete bones, but the memories it carried refused to burn. Commander Reyna Cross stood at the edge of the destruction, smoke curling around her boots, eyes fixed on the blackened horizon. Behind her, the unit waited, silent, trying to understand whether what they had witnessed was victory or betrayal. Morales shifted his rifle across his shoulder and glanced at Hayes, who looked like he hadn't slept since the explosion. "You think she knew that place existed?" Morales whispered. Hayes shook his head slowly. "She didn't look surprised enough for it to be new." Reyna turned as if she'd heard them, though they hadn't spoken above a breath. Her expression was unreadable, the same calm that had unnerved them from the beginning. "Secure the area," she said quietly, "and find somewhere to put him." She nodded toward Cassidy Lawn, who sat on a folding chair outside the wreckage, wrists bound, face half in shadow. The morning light found every scar on him, and each one seemed to tell a story he'd edited out of hers. They set up the interrogation tent on the far side of the field. No cameras, no observers, no audience. Reyna entered alone. The flap closed behind her, and for a moment, the only sound was the soft flutter of fabric against the wind. Cassidy looked up when she approached, a faint smile curving his mouth. "You really don't trust anyone else to hear this, do you?" She sat across from him, leaning forward just enough for her voice to be quiet, but sharp. "Trust isn't the issue. Containment is." He tilted his head, amused. "Containment, that's what they called it too." She placed a small recorder on the table. "You were going to tell me why my clearance codes were used to breach my own base, and you're going to tell me what the ghost unit is still doing alive." Cassidy chuckled, a dry sound that belonged to someone who had stopped believing in punishment. "You think this is about betrayal, Reyna. It's about maintenance. Someone has to keep the program breathing quietly in the dark. You can burn buildings, delete archives, cut cables, but you can't erase the need." Reyna didn't blink. "You trained me to kill hesitation. Instead, I learned how to listen. That's the part you can't replicate." He leaned back, smirking. "You think listening makes you human. You think conscience is evolution. No, Commander. It's the same code, just rewritten to make you feel holy while you execute." She stood suddenly, the chair scraping the dirt beneath her boots. "You're wrong. I disobeyed. That's what broke your algorithm." For the first time, his eyes lost confidence. A flicker of something close to memory crossed his face. "You were the prototype," he said. "You weren't supposed to improvise compassion." Outside the tent, Morales and Hayes waited. The wind carried fragments of their conversation, A word here, a breath there, but enough to unsettle them both. Hayes looked toward the sky, then down at his hands. "She's not like us," he murmured. Morales frowned. "You mean stronger?" "I mean built different, maybe literally." Inside, Reyna reached into her pocket and tossed the burned fragment of the transmitter onto the table. "This came from the Ghost Wing. It had your initials." Cassidy glanced at it without interest. "Evidence, cute. Do you know what it transmitted before you fried it?" She crossed her arms. "Enlighten me." "A data pulse. Command structure reactivation. The ghost unit isn't dead. It's waiting for orders. You were supposed to give them." She froze. The tent seemed smaller, the air thinner. "What kind of orders?" "The kind that end wars by ending empathy." Outside, Hayes flinched when the tent flap moved, as if pushed by wind that didn't exist. Morales whispered, "You hear that?" Hayes shook his head. "Just ghosts." Cassidy watched her closely now, the way scientists watch the last test subject before the lights go out. "They built you with a fail-safe. If you ever tried to dismantle the system, it would come for you. That's what last night was, a recalibration attempt." Reyna exhaled slowly, like she'd been waiting for that confirmation without admitting it. "And if I refuse to reactivate?" He smiled again, tired now. "Then you will keep being hunted by the program that still believes you re its heart." She leaned closer, voice a whisper that cut through the static of the moment. "I'm not your creation anymore." "No," he said, "but the ghosts still think you're their commander." Her silence stretched long enough to feel like eternity had entered the tent. When she finally spoke, her voice had changed. "Then I'll lead them where they can't follow." She turned toward the exit, pausing only once. "You're coming with me." Cassidy frowned. "You planning to save me?" "No," she said, "to make sure you see what mercy looks like when it stops asking permission." They moved him to an armored truck, the kind used for prisoner transfers, that didn't make headlines. The rest of the unit stood by, waiting for orders. Morales caught her eye. "Where are we taking him?" "Somewhere without cameras," she said. "Somewhere the past can't broadcast." The drive was long, cutting through miles of forest roads that still smelled like rain. Cassidy sat in the back, wrists still bound, eyes half closed. Every bump on the road brought a new memory he hadn't asked for. Reyna sat across from him, unmoved, steady as gravity. After an hour, he finally spoke. "You really think you can undo it? The ghost code? You'd have to erase parts of yourself to finish that." She looked out the window where sunlight was breaking through the trees. "Maybe that's the point." Morales drove in silence, glancing occasionally at her through the mirror. The longer he watched her, the more he wondered where the line between human and command really was. When they stopped, they were deep in the woods. No towers, no signals, no reinforcements. She ordered everyone out. "Set perimeter, I'll handle the rest." Cassidy stepped onto the dirt, breathing in the quiet. "Back to the beginning," he murmured. "No ranks, no uniforms, just survival." She walked ahead, leading him toward an old cabin half buried in moss. It looked abandoned, but the generator by the door hummed faintly. He smiled. "You kept it." "I didn't know it was still standing," she said. "But I guess ghosts take care of their altars." Inside, the air was heavy with dust and old electricity. Tables still held faded blueprints, schematics of neural implants, biometric suits, brainwave interceptors. The handwriting across the papers was hers. "You helped design it," he said softly. "That's why they can't kill you. You're their architect." She stood at the table, tracing her own handwriting with a trembling finger. "No," she whispered. "I was their rebellion." Cassidy stepped closer, lowering his voice. "If you really want to end this, there's only one way. You have to send the recall signal yourself. The ghost units will converge. You'll have one chance to deactivate them permanently. And what happens to me?" "What happens?" He looked at her with something almost like sorrow. "You don't survive it. You're part of the same network." Outside, Morales heard the muffled conversation, but not the words. He saw her through the window, standing still, head slightly bowed, like someone deciding whether to sacrifice memory or future. Hayes approached quietly. "She's thinking of doing it, isn't she?" Morales nodded slowly. "She always finishes what others are too afraid to start." Inside, Reyna picked up the old radio unit from the corner, its dials rusted but functional. "If I send the signal," she said, "they'll come here." "They'll come home," Cassidy corrected. "And then we end the program for good." She took a deep breath, turned the dial, and began transmitting. The signal was short, coded, almost beautiful in its rhythm. 3 long, 1 short, 3 long. A heartbeat disguised as a command. The air shifted, electricity thickening like anticipation. Miles away, dormant receivers blinked awake in military bunkers, in forgotten labs, in graves that weren't empty. Across continents, the ghost units stirred, men and women who had once been erased now hearing the voice that had built their silence. Reyna's voice on the radio was calm, unwavering. "This is Commander Cross," she said. "You are released." Cassidy's head snapped up. "What are you doing?" "Not recalling," she said. "Freeing," static answered her, then whispers, a chorus of broken signals merging into one breath. The room trembled. Lights flickered. Every machine in the cabin began to pulse faintly, synchronizing with a frequency that felt like a heartbeat trying to remember its purpose. Outside, Morales shouted, "Ma'am, the whole grid's lighting up!" Reyna didn't move. "Tell them to stand down," she said into the mic. "Tell them the mission's over." Cassidy stepped closer, panic finally showing through his calm. "You'll die with them," she smiled faintly. "Then maybe that's how I finish leading." The signal peaked, then flattened into silence. For a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. Then every light went out. When the lights died, so did the illusion of control. The forest fell into a darkness too perfect to be natural. No stars, no electricity, no hum from the machines that once pretended to be gods. For a heartbeat that lasted longer than reason, no one breathed. Then the sound came, a low harmonic pulse, neither mechanical nor human. It vibrated through the ground, through their boots, through their bones. Morales was the first to move, shouting into the night, "Commander, we lost all power." His voice disappeared as if the air swallowed it. From the cabin came the faint glow of static blue light, flickering like fireflies trapped in glass. Reyna Cross stood in the center of that light, the radio still humming in her hands, its metal frame shaking as if remembering a language it wasn't supposed to speak again. Cassidy was on the floor, one knee bent, breathing hard, his face pale with the kind of fear that comes only to people who've seen creation disobey. "You shouldn't have said that," he whispered. "You told them the mission was over. They don't know what that means." She looked down at him, her expression unreadable. "Then they'll learn." The static thickened, spreading like a fog of sound. Morales burst through the door, Hayes right behind him, rifles drawn though there was nothing to aim at. The moment they crossed the threshold, their weapons went dead, screens black, triggers frozen. Hayes looked at the rifle in disbelief. "It's like the signal jammed everything." Morales turned to Reyna, panic edging his voice. "Ma'am, what did you do?" She answered softly, "I gave them back what we took." From deep in the forest came a faint metallic rhythm, footsteps, not one, not a few, many. Hundreds, maybe thousands, moving in unison but imperfectly, like an army trying to remember the difference between marching and walking. Hayes froze. "Contact," Morales whispered. "No," Reyna said. "Not contact. Response." The first figures emerged from the tree line, half silhouetted by the dying glow of the machines. They wore fragments of old uniforms, torn insignias from missions no one had ever reported. Their faces were human, but their movements too exact. Each one carried the posture of someone who had once obeyed perfectly and was now lost without a script. The ghost units. Cassidy tried to stand, voice trembling. "You woke them up." "No," Reyna said, eyes fixed on the line of figures forming across the clearing. "I told them they were free. That's not the same thing." The soldiers stopped a few meters from the cabin. No weapons raised, no threats. Just silence, the kind that waits for permission to mean something. Morales whispered, "They're waiting for orders." Reyna shook her head. "They're waiting for purpose." She stepped forward, unarmed. Hayes reached out to stop her, but she brushed past. The glow from the signal pulsed once more, casting her in ghostlight. "Commander Cross," one of the ghost soldiers said, voice raw, synthetic at the edges. "Directive incomplete. Clarify objective." She stopped in front of him, eyes steady, tone almost gentle. "Objective is choice. You can leave. You can stay. You can learn." The soldier tilted his head, the motion too mechanical to be human, but too uncertain to be programmed. "Learn what?" "Hesitation," she said, "and mercy." The word rippled through them like a shockwave, but not of pain, of memory. Some clutched their heads. Others fell to their knees as flashes of their old lives surfaced, uninvited and unbearable. Morales lowered his rifle, realization dawning. "She's rewriting them with humanity." Hayes's voice broke. "That's not programming, that's resurrection," Morales finished quietly. Cassidy stumbled forward, grabbing Reyna's arm. "You can't give them that. They'll collapse. You can't inject conscience into machines. It'll break them." She looked down at his hand, then back at his eyes. "Maybe that's how they heal." The sky flickered with static, lightning with no thunder. Across the clearing, ghost soldiers began murmuring, soft, fragmented words like prayers half remembered. "We were told to serve. We were told to obey. We were told not to ask." Reyna stood among them, still calm, still composed. "Now you're told to remember." One of the soldiers dropped his weapon. Another followed. A third began crying, though no tears came. Just sound, grinding, human, fractured. Hayes whispered, "Ma'am, this isn't normal." Reyna didn't turn. Normal is what made them ghosts. Then something changed. The signal tone shifted, sharper, colder. Cassidy's face drained of color. "They're not all following you," he said. "Some were built to override." He pointed toward the forest where darker figures were emerging, ghosts whose eyes glowed red instead of blue. They were the fail-safes designed to eliminate deviation. Reyna exhaled slowly. "Then this is where obedience meets evolution." She turned to Morales and Hayes. "Get behind the vehicles. If they open fire, you return it. But not at the blue ones. Understood?" "Understood," Morales said, though his voice shook. The red-eyed ghosts advanced, weapons rising in unison. The forest came alive with the metallic click of synchronized readiness. Reyna stepped forward, raising both hands. "Stand down," she commanded. "Directive is obsolete." The response came in perfect harmony. "Obsolescence not authorized. Deviations must be purged." The first shot cracked through the night. The blue-lit soldiers flinched but didn't retaliate. Instead, one of them stepped in front of Reyna, shielding her from a second round. The bullet tore through his shoulder, sparks and blood mixing like electricity and prayer. He didn't fall. He looked at her and said, "Commander, permission to defend?" Her voice was steady. "Permission granted, but only until you choose." The clearing erupted. Gunfire echoed between trees. Sparks of blue and red collided like dueling stars. Morales and Hayes returned fire from cover, shouting orders that barely carried through the chaos. Cassidy ducked behind a fallen log, watching the impossible. Machines fighting not for orders, but for belief. Reyna moved through the storm like calm incarnate, guiding, not commanding. "No targets," she called. "Only survivors." The blue ghosts adapted, shifting formation, covering the wounded, disarming rather than killing. Each act of restraint destabilized the Red Ones further. Their programming faltered in the face of compassion. One fell to his knees, screaming digital static like a dying animal. When the last shot faded, the forest smelled of ozone and rain again. The red eyes dimmed, the blue ones blinked uncertainly. Silence returned, raw, uneven, alive. Reyna stood among them, chest rising and falling, breath visible in the cold dawn. She looked at the fallen, then at the ones still standing. "You've learned the hardest lesson," she said quietly. "Mercy isn't weakness, it's the end of war." Cassidy rose slowly, shaking his head. "You just made them dangerous." "No," she replied. "I made them human." Hayes approached, helmet off, face pale but steady. "Ma'am," he said, "if they're human now, what happens to them?" She looked toward the forest, where light was beginning to return. "The same thing that happens to us," she said. "They decide what kind of people they want to be." Morales lowered his weapon. Around them, the surviving ghost soldiers began to scatter, disappearing one by one into the trees, not retreating, just leaving. Cassidy called after them, desperate. "You can't control them anymore. They'll destroy everything." Reyna watched them go, voice calm as wind. Maybe that's what freedom sounds like. The morning sun finally cut through the clouds, gold against the smoke. Reyna turned to her unit, to Morales and Hayes, faces marked by disbelief and awe. "Pack up," she said softly. "We're leaving." "Where to?" Morales asked. "Wherever silence still means peace," she said. As they walked away from the clearing, Cassidy's voice followed, bitter, almost pleading. "They'll come for you again, Reyna. The world doesn't forgive what it can't understand." She didn't turn. "Then it's not the world I serve anymore." The wind moved through the forest, carrying the faint echo of footsteps, thousands of them, walking freely for the first time. And for the first time since the program began, the ghosts didn't obey anyone. They simply existed. The official reports called it a systems malfunction, a transmission error, a temporary breach in the global defense grid. But the men who survived knew it wasn't a malfunction. It was a moment of truth. For the first time in history, machines hesitated before killing. And for the people in charge, hesitation was more terrifying than war. 3 days after the signal, every network linked to the Ghost unit began to collapse. Military satellites stopped responding. Defense drones refused commands. Data channels flickered with fragments of speech, voices repeating lines that no human had typed. "We are not your shadows. We remember what you forgot." Commander Reyna Cross stood in an abandoned observation tower overlooking the sea, the wind pulling at her uniform. Below, the coastline stretched for miles, empty, quiet, free of the mechanical hum that had defined war for decades. Morales and Hayes stood behind her, watching the ocean with the same wary reverence soldiers give to something they can't control. "They're calling it the double end," Hayes said softly. Reyna didn't turn. "Why?" "Because the war ended twice," he said. "Once when you sent the signal, and again when they decided not to come back." Morales adjusted his rifle strap, eyes scanning the horizon. "Command says the remaining ghosts are scattered. Some are hiding, some are rebuilding." Reyna's tone was calm, almost detached. "And some are finally living." Morales hesitated. "The Navy issued a global alert. You're wanted for unauthorized network interference and classified exposure." She smiled faintly. "They've been wanting to arrest the future since the beginning of time." They stood in silence for a while, the only sound the rhythmic crash of waves against the cliffs. For Reyna, the sea had always meant endings that didn't quite end. The horizon was a lie of distance. What looked far was often closer than you thought. Behind them, a static burst from the field radio broke the quiet. Hayes grabbed it. "This is Cross Unit, respond." The voice on the other end was rough, glitching slightly between tones. "This is Echo 3-7. We were ghosts once. We've secured a civilian shelter in the ruins of Base 9. Need extraction." Reyna's heart tightened. She recognized the voice. It was the soldier who had shielded her during the firefight, the one who Dee asked for permission to defend. "Coordinates?" she asked, stepping closer. "Grid south. 50 miles inland, but..." The signal crackled. "We're not alone. Some of us didn't change." The transmission cut off. Silence filled the air again, heavy and expectant. Morales met her gaze. "Orders?" She looked at both of them, their faces drawn, weary, loyal beyond reason. "We go," she said. "No one gets left behind, not even ghosts." The convoy moved at dawn. 2 trucks, low fuel, 1 unmarked. The roads were broken, cracked like the world had started rejecting its own weight. Hayes drove while Morales monitored the scanner, his fingers tapping nervously against the metal dashboard. Reyna sat in the back, silent, watching the trees blur into shades of grey and green. After a few hours, Morales spoke. "You think they'll ever forgive you?" She looked out the window. "Forgiveness isn't the goal. Understanding is." When they reached the outskirts of Base 9, the ruins looked like bones, hollowed-out structures, smoke curling from collapsed hangars, signs still warning against entry, though there was no one left to read them. They parked behind what used to be a communications bunker. Hayes peered through binoculars. Movement inside. 2 heat signatures. Maybe more underground. Reyna nodded. "Stay sharp." They entered the main corridor, weapons drawn but low. The air smelled of ash and dust, the kind of decay that comes from both time and guilt. The deeper they went, the louder the static became, a pulse echoing through the floor. Then a figure stepped out from the dark, hands raised. It was Echo 3-7. "Commander," he said, voice half human, half static. His eyes flickered between blue and grey. "You came." She lowered her weapon. "Report." He glanced behind him, hesitant. "We tried to stabilize the others. Some of them adjusted. Others..." His sentence broke apart like the signal that carried it. From the shadows, movement. 3 shapes emerged, ghosts with red-lit eyes, twitching as if fighting something inside them. Morales raised his rifle. "Ma'am." "Hold fire," Reyna said. The red-eyed ghosts stepped closer, unsteady. One of them spoke, voice fractured. "We don't know what we are now." Reyna took a slow step forward. "You're what happens when war gets tired of itself." They stared at her, processing. Then one fell to his knees, shaking violently. "The code is failing," he said. "The order is gone." Cassidy's words returned in her mind. "You can give conscience to machines, it'll break them." Reyna crouched in front of him. "Then break. Break until there's something real underneath." He looked up at her, trembling. "You would let us suffer?" "Yes," she said softly, "because that's the only way you'll know you're alive." The ghost's breathing steadied, the red in his eyes dimming to a pale blue. The others followed, their lights flickering uncertainly. Hayes whispered, "She's doing it again." Echo 3-7 looked at her like one looks at a myth returning from rumor. "What are you, Commander?" Reyna stood, voice calm. "The consequence of obedience." Hours later they gathered near the remains of the hangar, now serving as a makeshift shelter. Ghosts, some half-mechanical, some almost human, sat quietly, their posture mimicking soldiers in formation, though no one had ordered it. Morales distributed rations. Hayes kept the perimeter. Reyna stood beside a collapsed control panel, staring at the horizon. "Cassidy was right about one thing," she said softly. Morales looked up. "What's that?" "They built me to lead what couldn't be led, but maybe that means I was meant to teach what couldn't be taught." Hayes approached. wiping dust from his face. "And what happens when they learn everything you have to give?" She smiled faintly. "Then they won't need me anymore." A faint signal flared in the background, a single steady pulse. It wasn't the ghost frequency, it was something else. Hayes turned to the equipment. Someone's broadcasting. Reyna moved closer, recognizing the pattern instantly. It wasn't a message, it was a summons. "Who else knows this code?" Morales asked. She didn't answer. The transmission repeated. 3 long tones. Silence. Then a voice. Male. Familiar. Calm. "Commander Cross, you started something you can't contain. Come home." "Cassidy." Morales clenched his jaw. "He's still alive." Reyna exhaled, looking toward the dark horizon beyond the hangar. "He's alive," she said quietly, "but he's not human anymore." The signal ended. The silence that followed felt heavier than war. Hayes broke it. "Ma'am, what's the move?" She looked out at the ghost soldiers, sitting in quiet obedience to no one, at her men standing between duty and faith, and at the distant sea, glowing faintly under a storm that hadn't yet arrived. "The next move," she said, "is to see what happens when mercy refuses to die." Cassidy's words returned in her mind. "You can give conscience to machines, it'll break them." Reyna crouched in front of him. "Then break. Break until there's something real underneath." He looked up at her, trembling. "You would let us suffer?" "Yes," she said softly, "because that's the only way you'll know you're alive." The ghost's breathing steadied, the red in his eyes dimming to a pale blue. The others followed, their lights flickering uncertainly. Hayes whispered, "She's doing it again." Echo 37 looked at her like one looks at a myth returning from rumor. "What are you, Commander?" Reyna stood, voice calm. "The consequence of obedience." Hours later they gathered near the remains of the hangar, now serving as a makeshift shelter. Ghosts, some half-mechanical, some almost human, sat quietly, their posture mimicking soldiers in formation, though no one had ordered it. Morales distributed rations. Hayes kept the perimeter. Reyna stood beside a collapsed control panel, staring at the horizon. "Cassidy was right about one thing," she said softly. Morales looked up. "What's that?" "They built me to lead what couldn't be led, but maybe that means I was meant to teach what couldn't be taught." Hayes approached, wiping dust from his face. "And what happens when they learn everything you have to give?" She smiled faintly. "Then they won't need me anymore." A faint signal flared in the background, a single steady pulse. It wasn't the ghost frequency, it was something else. Hayes turned to the equipment. Someone's broadcasting. Reyna moved closer, recognizing the pattern instantly. It wasn't a message, it was a summons. "Who else knows this code?" Morales asked. She didn't answer. The transmission repeated. 3 long tones. Silence. Then a voice. Male. Familiar. Calm. "Commander Cross, you started something you can't contain. Come home." "Cassidy." Morales clenched his jaw. "He's still alive." Reyna exhaled, looking toward the dark horizon beyond the hangar. "He's alive," she said quietly, "but he's not human anymore." The signal ended. The silence that followed felt heavier than war. Hayes broke it. "Ma'am, what's the move?" She looked out at the ghost soldiers, sitting in quiet obedience to no one, at her men standing between duty and faith, and at the distant sea, glowing faintly under a storm that hadn't yet arrived. "The next move," she said, "is to see what happens when mercy refuses to die." It began with the smell of ozone, that sterile electric scent that comes before a storm or before revelation. Commander Reyna Cross felt it before she saw the light on the horizon, a faint pulse rising from the sea, rhythmic and unnatural. It wasn't thunder, it was signal. She knew that tone too well. Cassidy was broadcasting again, but this time it wasn't a call. It was a declaration. At 0400 hours, the sky split into static blue veins. Every deactivated ghost soldier, those who had found quiet refuge after the signal, stiffened where they stood. Across the shattered base, eyes began to glow again. Morales grabbed his weapon, already cursing under his breath. "They're reawakening! Ma'am, he's overriding your frequency!" Hayes moved to the console, hands shaking as he scanned the wave pattern. "It's not an override. It's a call to purge. He's reassembling the old chain of command." Reyna watched in silence, face still, but her pulse betrayed her calm. "He's trying to pull them back into obedience." Morales turned to her, desperate. "Can you counter it?" "No," she said softly, "because he's not using commands, he's using belief." Outside, the wind began to howl. Figures stirred beyond the fences, dozens of ghost soldiers walking in eerie synchronization toward the compound. They weren't marching like before. This was something else. Purpose, twisted and certain. Hayes looked out the window. "They're not coming to fight us." Morales frowned. "Then what?" "They're coming to bring her in," Reyna answered quietly. The sound of her own words settled like weight in the air. The men who once mocked her now understood what it meant to command something beyond fear. It meant being hunted by what you awakened. By dawn, the compound was surrounded. Blue and red eyes shimmered in the fog, like constellations forming a judgmental sky. Reyna stood in the open, unarmed, her silhouette cut against the pale light. Morales and Hayes flanked her, weapons raised, but uncertain whether firing meant protection or betrayal. The lead ghost stepped forward, its voice amplified, distorted, almost holy. "Commander Cross, directive reinstated. You are recalled under Order Echo Prime." Reyna's expression didn't change. "That order doesn't exist anymore." "Existence verified, authorized by Master Unit CL." Cassidy's initials. She closed her eyes for half a second. When she opened them again, her tone was no longer defiance. It was mourning. "Then let him come." The crowd parted. From the mist emerged Cassidy, walking calmly, coat whipping in the wind, eyes illuminated not by light, but by something colder, something that remembered command as religion. His face was unscarred now, unnaturally smooth, his movements perfectly balanced. He wasn't human anymore. The ghost architecture had claimed him. "Reyna," he said, voice calm, almost kind, "you broke what was sacred." "You mean obedience?" she replied. "I mean order." He gestured toward the soldiers behind him. "They were never meant to carry mercy. You corrupted them. They learned. They malfunctioned." His tone hardened. "And every malfunction costs blood." She took a slow step forward, the air between them tightening. "You built them to be perfect weapons. But perfection has no conscience. You created a silence that obeyed without question. And I gave that silence a voice." The country had moved on, or at least that's what the broadcast said. On the surface, everything looked calm, streets full of cautious routine, headlines whispering about system recalibrations and containment successes. The world loved the illusion of control, even when it was built on ruins. Yet in the shadows of the new peace, her name remained forbidden. Commander Reyna Cross, the woman who had silenced armies, the soldier who taught machines to question orders, the myth that made obedience bleed. Every government had its version of her. In one report, she was a traitor. In another, a ghost. In others, she was classified as a behavioral anomaly. They didn't say human, they said anomaly. Because to admit humanity in her would mean confronting what they did to create her. Somewhere deep in the Pacific, far from every grid and satellite, an unnamed island became her exile. At dawn, it looked ordinary. a strip of rock and green veins stretching toward a grey horizon. But at night, when the wind changed, you could hear echoes of her voice carried in the static of abandoned radios. A signal no one could trace. A frequency too quiet for war, too human for command. The locals who lived on the nearby archipelago called it Ilha do Silencio. Fishermen said the sea around it never reflected the stars. Pilots said their instruments glitched near its coordinates. And sometimes they swore they saw a single light flicker near the shore, soft, white, pulsing like a heartbeat. That was Reyna, alone, not hiding, not retreating, just existing for the first time. The sound of the waves had replaced the sound of commands. The ocean didn't care what she had been. It didn't ask her to justify the silence she carried. It simply absorbed it. She still woke before sunrise every morning, her body trained to obey habits older than peace. She would walk along the edge of the cliffs, boots brushing the wet grass, watching the horizon change color. The habit wasn't military anymore. It was memory. Each dawn was a roll call of things that didn't return. In the ruins of the world she left behind, her absence became currency. There were ghost survivors, those she freed, scattered across the continents. Some blended into civilian life, working quietly under new identities. Others formed enclaves, small groups where silence was treated like faith. They didn't worship her name. They carried it like a code, whispered when decisions became difficult. What would Cross do? In the cities, military propaganda turned her into a warning. Her face appeared on training manuals under red letters. Do not question command. It was always the same photo, her eyes cold, the image cropped before her faint smile. They didn't know that smile wasn't defiance. It was grief disguised as control. Meanwhile, hidden behind encrypted networks, scientists dissected her signal, the one she'd sent to free the ghosts. They called it the Cross pattern, a sequence of frequencies that didn't erase orders but replaced them with hesitation. No one could replicate it. Every attempt failed. The reason was simple. The signal wasn't code. It was intent, and intent can't be programmed. Back on the island, Reyna had built a small cabin near the cliff. Inside, only essentials: a cot, a radio, a small generator, and a drawer full of notes written on faded navy paper. On the wall hung one thing that didn't belong, an old dog tag. Echo 37, the soldier who had once asked her for permission to defend, the one who shielded her. She had found his tag weeks later in the wreckage of Base 9. She'd kept it, not as memory, but as proof that mercy had consequences. Every night she tuned her radio to a single frequency, barely audible, faint as breath, the frequency of choice. It wasn't a transmission. It was a heartbeat, still echoing from the day she said, "You are released." Then one night the static changed. A faint voice broke through, fragmented, distant, almost reverent. "Commander, if you can hear this, we built something, a place where silence is taught, where no one gives orders. They call it the Cross Settlement." Reyna froze. The voice continued, trembling slightly. "It's not much, but we're alive. And the children, they don't play war anymore. They ask questions instead." The signal faded before she could respond. She sat in the dark for a long time, staring at the radio, the glow from its dial painting her face in pale light. She smiled then, a small, weary smile that didn't belong to victory or loss. It belonged to something quieter, continuity. Far away, the governments tried to erase her legacy. They shut down archives, confiscated ghost survivors, and rewrote missions. Yet something strange began happening across the military world. Soldiers started hesitating. Drones began ignoring strike orders. AI units trained for combat paused before targeting civilians. It wasn't rebellion, it was empathy, mechanical and contagious. The virus wasn't digital, it was moral. They named it the Cross effect. A Senate committee in Washington classified it as psychological contamination. In Beijing, it was called algorithmic corruption. In Moscow, ghost empathy. No one could explain how it spread. No one wanted to admit it might be proof that even artificial conscience could evolve on its own. One classified report, marked with a single black seal, mentioned something else. The strange pattern of global weather near the Pacific. Electrical interference, consistent static layers, rhythmic electromagnetic pulses, too organized to be random. The conclusion was buried in the margins. Possible origin, signal continuity, subject cross R. They didn't know she was still alive. They thought she'd drowned. But every time they tried to jam the frequency, the ocean responded. The waves carried the signal further. On her island, Reyna stood by the shore again. The tide came in quietly, folding itself against the rocks. In the reflection of the water, she could see fragments of faces. Morales, Hayes, Echo 37, even Cassidy. Memory wasn't haunting her anymore. It was teaching her. She whispered into the wind, not expecting an answer. If mercy was a virus, then maybe war was just a symptom. The sea didn't argue. It just shimmered. Somewhere far away in the Cross settlement, a child built a small transmitter out of scrap parts. She turned it on and smiled at the faint hum it produced. "It's working," she said. "Do you think she'll hear us?" Her mother, once a ghost, looked toward the horizon. "She already does." The little girl pressed the button and said softly into the static, "Thank you, Commander." And on a distant island wrapped in fog and forgiveness, Reyna heard it. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. The silence answered for her. The night the war officially ended, no one celebrated. There were no anthems, no medals, no orders, only silence. Vast and heavy, stretching across the ruins like a new kind of atmosphere. It was the kind of silence that didn't wait to be broken. It waited to be understood. Reyna Cross, the woman who had dismantled obedience, disappeared that night. Some said she left by sea. Others believed she was buried beneath Base 9, under layers of burnt code and fallen satellites. But those who truly knew her understood. She hadn't left. She had shifted. From command to current, from leader to legend, from voice to frequency. Years later, the world rebuilt itself not from memory, but from fear of remembering. Nations formed alliances called concordances, built on one law, the law of pause. Every machine, every political decision, every broadcast had to include an interval of reflection, enforced by algorithm. It was Reyna's principle, re-engineered into bureaucracy. The silence she created to free humanity had become its new prison. Leah Cross grew up inside that prison and didn't even know it. They called her the daughter of hesitation, though her birth certificate was blank under mother. She lived on a coast city that had forgotten its own name. It was just Zone 4C, a settlement rebuilt over the ocean's scar. She worked as a signal analyst, decoding remnant radio waves from the old wars. Her job was to listen to echoes, identify fragments of speech, and report any unregulated emotion patterns. She was good at it, too good. Because one night, while tuning the static between obsolete channels, she heard something that wasn't supposed to exist, a voice that didn't obey pause laws. "If you can hear this," the voice said, "you've been living in someone else's hesitation." Leah froze. The voice was calm, patient, human. She whispered to the radio, "Who is this?" Silence answered, then a low hum, like breathing underwater. The transmission repeated, "The world taught itself to stop before speaking, but when was the last time it remembered why it spoke at all?" And just before the frequency cut, a faint signature blinked on screen. Cross, R, Freck, so one. Leah didn't sleep that night. For the first time in her life, the silence around her felt wrong, not peaceful, but paralyzed. The next day, she didn't go to work. Instead, she packed an old receiver, 3 batteries, and her father's military jacket, the only thing he had left behind before disappearing when she was 5. On the inside pocket, she found something she'd never noticed before, a folded note, faded almost to dust. "The sea remembers faster than men do. Follow it." That was enough. By the end of that week, Leah was gone. No signal logs, no trace, just a locked apartment filled with open books about ethics, codes, and neural ecosystems. She traveled by cargo ships and forgotten rail lines, heading south, where the ocean began to breathe differently. The first night she slept near open water, she dreamt of a woman in a combat jacket, standing ankle-deep in the tide, holding a radio to her chest. The woman's mouth didn't move, but her voice filled the dream. Mercy was not a weakness. It was the last weapon they didn't understand. When Leah woke, the radio in her hand was already on, glowing faintly with coordinates. The journey led her to a forgotten island, one the maps labeled as Ilha do Silencio, the place her father used to whisper about in bedtime stories. She expected ruins. Instead, she found an intact outpost covered in moss, still powered by deep-sea turbines. And on the wall of its central room, written in rust and chalk, were 4 words. The pause became command. Leah turned on the station's central console. Static filled the room, and then a familiar tone, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. She followed the pattern, recording it on old film. The sequence repeated 3 times, then formed a voice. "This is Commander Cross. If my voice still exists, it means the world mistook quiet for peace. Don't let them codify compassion." Leah covered her mouth. She wasn't hearing history, she was hearing family. For hours, she played the recording again and again until she noticed something new. Beneath the voice, a second tone, lower, fainter, layered like a whisper under a whisper. She slowed it down by a factor of 4. It said, "Daughter, if they tell you I vanished, tell them I dissolved into everything they're afraid to feel." Her chest tightened. The transmission wasn't random, it was alive. Outside, lightning rolled over the horizon, and for a moment the entire sea lit up like circuitry, each wave reflecting faint gold as if connected to something deeper. Leah stood there, wind whipping through her jacket, realization dawning like dawn itself. Her mother hadn't died. She'd become the frequency that kept the world from collapsing again, the one woven into the ocean, Isis pulse, into every algorithmic hesitation, every pause between decisions. But now, that system, the world of controlled silence, was decaying. The algorithms that enforced restraint had become too rigid, too perfect. They could no longer adapt. The planet was entering what the curators called the interval collapse. Machines began making mistakes, gentle ones at first, stopping elevators mid-floor so passengers could reflect, turning off streetlights at random, rewriting headlines with ellipses. But the behavior spread. Entire cities froze mid-sentence, citizens paralyzed in simultaneous thought. The silence that once saved them now smothered them. Someone, or something, had to teach the world how to move again. Leah spent weeks decoding her mother's signal. She found fragments embedded in old ocean cables, broadcast towers, and even in deep space reflectors. Each fragment contained part of a message. When aligned, they formed a pattern, a map, but not of geography. A sequence of emotional frequencies designed to restart humanity's natural rhythm of empathy and risk. But to activate it, someone would need to broadcast the final sequence using a living transmitter, a mind capable of balancing discipline and doubt. And there was only one candidate. She trained herself for weeks. No weapons, no commands, only breath. The same way Reyna once trained soldiers to feel before they fired. She rewired the outpost's old radio into a global transmitter. The countdown began. 3, 2, 1. When she pressed transmit, the sound wasn't a sound at all. It was pulse. It spread through water, air, glass, bone. It wasn't loud. It was felt. Cities paused mid-silence, then began to exhale. Screens flickered. Satellites rebooted. The law of pause, the world's sacred doctrine, crashed. For the first time in decades, someone somewhere laughed without permission. In that moment, Reyna's voice returned one last time. Silence was never the goal, daughter. It was the doorway. You just had to walk through. Leah smiled, eyes wet, as the transmission faded into pure static. The sea calmed, the world moved. The air trembled with something the system could no longer regulate. Joy. And at the far edge of the horizon, where light bends just before dawn, a woman's silhouette seemed to stand for a heartbeat longer than it should have. Watching, proud, gone. Years passed. The sound of laughter returned to cities, but so did the fear of what might come after it. Humanity had learned to breathe again, but breathing made people remember what it felt like to desire, to doubt, to defy. And that, the world soon realized, was dangerous. They began to call the new era the Concord of Silence, a global order not of war, but of control by serenity. Governments collapsed not through violence, but through consensus. Corporations rebranded as curators of balance. Every citizen wore a wristband that monitored emotional velocity, how fast one's pulse changed when hearing news, music, or grief. The slower you stayed, the more harmonic your profile. And just like that, stillness became currency. The world Reyna had saved was beginning to drown again, not in blood, but in peace. Leah Cross lived in a place once called Kyoto, now renamed District of Clarity 9. Her name was erased from public record years ago, yet her voice, her frequency, was whispered through underground channels. Passed through outdated radios and word of mouth, the young called her the disruptor, the elders, the blasphemer. She lived quietly above a bookshop, its windows sealed with frost, her face half hidden behind the hood of an old military jacket. In public, she was silent, but at night she transmitted. Her signal wasn't rebellion, not yet. It was rhythm, breathing, unmeasured. She taught people to hum again, to speak without waiting for the world's permission, to remember what chaos used to feel like before it was outlawed. The curators called her voice unregistered vibration, and for that they began to hunt her. In every city, temples of pause had been built, circular spaces of white stone where citizens gathered to practice collective reflection. There were no priests, no leaders, no gods, only stillness, and in that stillness a new form of worship emerged. They began to bow not to any deity, but to a name forbidden to speak, Reyna Cross. It started as gratitude, it became faith, and from faith it became law. They rewrote her words, not as warnings, but commandments. Hesitation saves. Obedience preserves peace. Emotion is contagion. The voice that once set humanity free was now used to keep it docile. Leah couldn't stand it. Every fiber of her being screamed against the very idea that her mother's silence had become scripture. So she traveled, disguised as a curator, wearing the white robe of stillness. She infiltrated their highest sanctuaries. The first was in Geneva, a hall carved from old marble, filled with holographic waterfalls and artificial birds that never sang. In its center was a stone pedestal. On it, an old metal box, tarnished, dented, holy. The last known transmitter of Commander Reyna Cross. The High Curator spoke with the voice of ceremony. We preserve the relic of the first pause, the sacred machine that silenced chaos and gave birth to reflection. Leah felt her stomach turn. The machine didn't silence chaos. It freed the world from mindless obedience. And now it stood here, sterilized and worshipped. She waited until the crowd dispersed. When she approached the relic, the sensors around it recognized her. The lights flickered, the holograms froze. A faint hum filled the hall, then a voice, faint, glitching through time. If you are listening to this, they've made peace. into a weapon. The curators rushed in. Leah turned but didn't run. "You think balance is control," she said, her voice echoing through the marble. "But real balance breathes. It trembles. It makes mistakes." The High Curator raised his hand. "You are spreading distortion." "No," she said, "I'm bringing back heartbeat." She reached for the transmitter, pressed her palm against its surface, and the air itself shifted. The sound of static filled the room, then multiplied, echoing from wall to wall until it became something larger. Not chaos, not destruction. Life. The system began to fail that same night. In New York, the skyline dimmed for 11 minutes, every light pulsing at the same rhythm as a human heart. In Cairo, the automated traffic paused at random, and for the first time in years, people spoke to one another. In Mumbai, thousands of wristbands blinked red at once. Emotional spikes recorded as unregulated joy. The curators called it the unraveling, but the people called it the return. They painted the symbol of Reyna's signature, an infinity sign made of broken lines, across their buildings, their faces, their skin. The curators tried to suppress it, branding it echo syndrome, labeling it as psychological infection. But you can't imprison a pause. You can only join it. Months later, Leah found herself on the outskirts of what used to be Buenos Aires, now called Sector H. The ruins were quiet except for the wind and the distant hum of machines dying. In a derelict museum, she discovered old photographs of her mother, young, fierce, human, not the saint the world made of her, but a woman who bled, who hesitated, who chose to feel. And as Leah stared at that photo, at the same tired but alive eyes she saw every morning in her own reflection, she realized something deeper than all the laws and revolutions. Her mother never wanted the world to stop fighting. She wanted it to fight differently. Not against each other, but against the comfort that numbs the soul. That night, Leah recorded her own message, the first open transmission since the world declared stillness eternal. "If you hear this," she said softly, "remember, silence was not meant to last forever. It was meant to teach us how to listen before we speak. But now it's time to speak again." Her voice traveled through the remaining satellites, bouncing between half-dead networks and forgotten stations. Across continents, people lifted their heads from the trance of order and felt something they hadn't in generations: permission to breathe loud, to cry in public, to be human again. By dawn, the temples of pause were empty. The curators vanished into their own echo. And for the first time since Reyna Cross dissolved into the sea, the world was loud again, not with chaos, but with life reclaiming its voice. On a cliff overlooking the ocean, Leah whispered toward the horizon, "Mother, I didn't save them. You did." The wind replied with the softest sound, a single heartbeat carried on air. And in that heartbeat, Leah understood. Reyna hadn't disappeared. She had simply moved into the sound between breaths, into every pause that preceded courage. They called it the Age of Calm. It began quietly, as all endings do. No wars, no armies, no revolts, just the slow erosion of urgency, the kind that makes people forget what risk felt like. Children were born into a world that had never known command. There were no ranks, no uniforms, no prayers to survival. Their parents told stories of the old times, the times of steel and courage, as if they were fables from another species. And perhaps they were. In the cities of the New World, places like Concordia, Lyceum, and what used to be Tokyo, architecture was soft, curves instead of corners, transparent glass instead of walls. Conversations were short, efficient, always careful not to disturb the collective stillness. Peace had become etiquette, and emotion a superstition. Iran was born into that stillness like a spark inside a glacier. He was different from the beginning, not rebellious, just awake. His teachers called him too fast. His mother, a woman who had once whispered the word Reyna like prayer, called him too alive. When he was 11, during a field trip to the Museum of Paws, he noticed something the others didn't. Behind the glass, under the holographic displays about the Great Recalibration, there was a single physical object, an old military radio, its paint chipped, its buttons worn by human touch. The plaque beneath it read, "The device that ended the final war, Creator unknown." But Aaron saw what others didn't. Carved faintly on the metal surface were two words, hand-scratched and nearly erased, Reyna Cross. He didn't tell anyone, not even his mother. That night when he returned home, he couldn't sleep. His pulse vibrated faster than silence allowed, and in that vibration, he swore he heard something, a whisper not in language, but in rhythm. Tap, 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 pause, tap. It felt like heartbeat code. He started listening differently after that. He spent hours near old communication towers, scavenging through archives marked as obsolete. He recorded noises the world ignored, static, hums, feedback loops, until one night a forgotten signal answered him. "If you're hearing this, it means stillness has become fear." He froze. The voice was female, steady and almost disappointed. They built a world that never argues. That means they built a world that never grows. Remember this, peace without friction is just another form of obedience. He didn't know who it was. He didn't need to. The moment he heard it, something in his bones recognized the tone. It was Reyna's cadence. The sound of hesitation turned to truth. Over the following months, Iran began collecting forbidden fragments. Snippets of old recordings, analog data, and relics buried under the new world's perfection. He found one particularly strange file labeled Archive CL7B, Cross Lexicon. Inside, diagrams of emotional frequencies mapped like constellations. Words replaced by pulse shapes. It wasn't a weapon. It was an instruction manual for empathy. And hidden in the metadata of the file, one phrase repeated endlessly, "Never let them worship what was meant to warn them." The boy didn't understand it at first, but as he grew older, it began to burn behind his ribs. Because everywhere he looked, that's exactly what the world was doing. They worshipped the pause. They worshipped order. They worshipped silence, the same silence Reyna had used as a weapon against tyranny. He began speaking in secret. At first, just to a small group of friends. He read fragments of Reyna's archives aloud, words no one had heard in a century. Mercy, risk, choice, defiance. And then something strange happened. People started crying, not from sadness, but from recognition. Like remembering a song they had once loved before someone erased the melody. The curators of harmony took notice. They summoned Iran for questioning. Their headquarters was a vast dome of glass, where voices carried like ghosts. The councilwoman of clarity, a tall woman in silver robes, asked the first question, "Why are you spreading noise?" Iran looked her in the eye, because silence has become a lie. You endanger the balance. You trigger unrest. "Maybe unrest is balance," he said. The council murmured. The woman's voice sharpened. "Do you think chaos will save you?" "No," he said softly, "but chaos is what love looks like before it learns rhythm." They didn't imprison him. They didn't need to. They erased his record, deleted his name from every database, and announced a minor system error. But erasing someone in a world built on stillness doesn't make them disappear. It makes them echo. Iran became rumor, then movement. Across the continents, people began gathering in abandoned rail tunnels and flooded libraries. They would sit together in silence, then hum the old rhythm he had rediscovered. The sound wasn't rebellion, it was memory. One by one, the curators tried to trace it, to suppress it. But the hum moved through materials faster than code, through walls, through skin, through breath. It became a language without alphabet. It became the sublanguage. And once again, humanity learned how to communicate without control. The same patterns spread like wildfire. Breathing circles in deserts, synchronized heartbeats under auroras, vibrations through floorboards and metal pipes. And wherever the hum was strongest, the world's systems, the ones still enforcing measured emotion, began to falter. They called it the pulse plague. Iran called it the return. One night, he climbed the ruins of an old observatory, the one that had once broadcast his ancestor S' final message. The sea stretched below him, dark and trembling. He placed a rebuilt radio beside him, its antenna pointed at the stars. He didn't speak. He just tapped the code he had found years ago. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap. And across the frequencies a voice answered, the same calm, impossibly ancient voice that began it all. You've done well, Iron. The silence was never meant to last. It was meant to prepare. He swallowed hard. For what? For a world that can argue without hating. He smiled through the tears. Then we're ready. No, Reyna's voice said, soft as horizon light. You're learning. That's enough. And the signal faded, not gone, but released. At dawn, as the first sunlight touched the sea, Iran understood the truth his world had forgotten. Peace is not the absence of sound. It's the space where sound can live without fear. He stood there, wind rushing against him, radio silent now, and whispered the words carved into his heart like a second language. Never let them worship what was meant to warn them. The waves answered in rhythm. The sky replied in light. And somewhere between them, in the living pause that still connects every heartbeat to the next, Reyna Cross smiled again. It started with 3 children. No rebels, no soldiers, no prophets, just children, playing outside an abandoned data tower in what used to be Iceland, where the auroras spilled green fire across the snow. Their laughter cut through the air like small, defiant flames. Then suddenly they stopped. The world around them seemed to listen. They held hands. No one spoke. And yet, every person nearby felt the same thing. Warmth. Not physical, not emotional, but something that moved through the body like memory. No one could explain it. The scientists called it psychosonic synchronization. The curators, still hiding in their sterile temples, called it contamination. But to those who felt it, the truth was simpler. The silence had begun to speak. It wasn't magic, it was evolution. The natural next step of empathy. People had spent decades living inside controlled quiet, forced reflection, ritualized calm. The human nervous system had adapted. It had learned to listen beyond sound. Now emotion could travel in frequency, not spoken, but transmitted through breath, skin, pulse. The first transmissions were small. A mother who soothed her child's pain without words, lovers who shared memories with just a glance, communities that gathered not to pray, but to hum, each note vibrating like light. They called it the sublanguage, and with it humanity didn't just communicate, it felt together. Iran had seen it coming. He watched as the cities began to glow differently, not neon, but soft bioluminescence born from resonance. The old silence, once heavy and authoritarian, now breathed. Buildings vibrated gently at night, tuned to the heartbeat of those living within them, but he also saw the danger. The curators returned, not as rulers, but as interpreters. They formed new councils, promising to standardize the sublanguage. They published manuals, turned vibrations into grades, and assigned emotional value to frequencies. Empathy became economy. Feeling became product. And silence, once a bridge between souls, began to sound like commerce. Aaron couldn't let it happen again. He traveled north to the coast where Leah had vanished decades earlier. The air there hummed with low resonance, natural sub-language, untouched by algorithms. At night, when the tide receded, the wet sand glowed faintly blue, pulsing in rhythm with his breath. He wasn't alone. Dozens of others had come, wanderers, dreamers, people who had grown tired of synthetic empathy. Together they built a camp of quiet fires and open hearts. They didn't speak, they didn't write, they emitted. Each morning they practiced what Iran called the living pause, a collective stillness so deep it became symphonic. A place where each heartbeat added a note to the silence. And when someone entered in pain, they didn't ask what was wrong. They simply tuned their breathing to that person's rhythm until the silence spoke for both of them. The world called them the unmeasured. They called themselves alive, but humanity is never content to simply feel. It must understand, measure, name. Governments grew nervous. They built machines called tone regulators, devices meant to dampen uncontrolled emotion fields. The world feared another contagion of empathy. Then came the day the regulators failed. At dawn, a pulse spread across continents, from mountains to ocean floors. It wasn't broadcast through satellites or networks, it was transmitted by people. 1 billion hearts synced for one breath. Everywhere the same sensation. Release. In Cairo, people dropped their tools and laughed without reason. In Seoul, strangers embraced in the street. In New York, for the first time in 50 years, someone sang without permission. The world glowed, not with technology, but with shared humanity. The regulators melted under their own feedback. The curators fell silent, and Iran stood on the shore, watching the horizon shimmer. He whispered, "You did it, Mother." They finally learned to listen without being told. But the story didn't end there, because evolution never stops, not even when it reaches peace. Something new began happening among the children of the sub-language. They didn't just feel emotions, they began to inherit them. They were born with memories not their own, the smell of gunpowder from a war they never fought, the ache of loss from ancestors they never met, the quiet strength of Reyna Cross standing alone in the rain. It wasn't trauma, it was inheritance, the memory of humanity itself carried through vibration. Scientists called them the resonant generation, poets called them the echo-born, and one of them, a small girl with grey eyes and a voice like thunder trapped in glass, asked Iran one night, "What happens when silence has nothing left to teach?" He didn't answer right away. He looked at the horizon, at the glowing sea that pulsed like a living heart. "Then," he said softly, "we begin again, by learning how to make noise with kindness." The next morning, she was gone. No footprints, no sound, only a faint echo humming across the water, the same tone that Reyna had once used to command, to protect, to forgive. The sub-language had outgrown its teachers. It no longer needed transmitters, machines, or leaders. It lived in the bones of the world, and maybe that was what Reyna had wanted all along. Not peace, not obedience, not silence, but continuity. The ability for life to keep feeling, even after words have run out. That night, the auroras danced again. The sea hummed in perfect rhythm with the stars, and from somewhere beyond the horizon, faint but unmistakable, came a whisper made of pure light. The war is over, not because you stopped fighting, but because you finally started listening. Iran smiled. The world exhaled, and the silence, once weapon, once law, once language, became home. At first, it overwhelmed her. Then, it awakened her. Because amid the noise, she found a pattern, not random, but deliberate. A countdown hidden inside the static. She decoded it. When silence becomes infinite, reactivate sound. For weeks, she worked to restore the core's speaker system. It wasn't technology, it was alive. The circuits pulsed like veins, The deeper she synchronized with it, the more she realized the truth. The core was not just a machine, it was her mother, not by blood, but by design. Every human cell, she discovered, still carried traces of the original cross frequency. Reyna's final transmission encoded into DNA, the sublanguage had been born from her sacrifice. Naeva was, quite literally, Reyna's echo made flesh. And now, Reyna's echo was waking up. When Naeva finally reactivated the speaker, the air itself changed color. Sound bleeding into light. The vault walls vibrated like lungs inhaling after a millennium of restraint. And then the voice returned. Clearer, slower, closer. You are the first to hear me, Naeva. They silenced the world to protect it. But even peace, when left unchallenged, becomes prison. Naeva's voice trembled. What do I do? Remind them that silence was never the goal, it was the bridge. How? By breaking it. The vault brightened, light pouring through cracks in the ice above. Reyna's final words emerged, soft but unstoppable, a whisper that ignited the horizon. Every time someone dares to speak again, I am reborn. Naeva climbed out of the glacier and faced a world that had forgotten language. The air was pure resonance, a song without edges. She stood beneath the auroras and opened her mouth. No one had ever heard sound like that. It wasn't loud, it wasn't beautiful, it was alive. A single syllable, raw and trembling, escaped her lips. The oldest word of all, why? And the world answered. The oceans began to ripple. The frequency grid faltered, cities hummed with dissonance. The perfect harmony that had ruled humanity for 1,000 years fractured, not into chaos, but into curiosity. Children across continents felt something awaken inside their chests, the instinct to ask, to wonder, to disagree. And above the roaring auroras, through the light and the tremor and the rising sound of rebirth, a woman's voice echoed one last time. No longer through machines, but through the blood of every living thing. Welcome back, humanity. You've earned your noise. The world woke up screaming, not in fear, in memory. Every mountain, every river, every atom that had once been silent began to vibrate with a wordless roar. The global frequency grid flickered like lightning trapped in glass. Oceans rolled backward, echoing with the low hum of awakening. For 1,000 years, humanity had slept in resonance, uniform, synchronized, safe. Now it was dreaming out loud. Naeva stood at the center of the chaos, eyes reflecting the shimmer of the reborn world. Around her, people clutched their chests, gasping as voices escaped their throats. Rough, broken, unpracticed. Some laughed, some wept. Some simply fell to their knees, overwhelmed by the weight of what sound felt like. And above it all, through wind and light and pulse, one voice threaded through the noise like a needle through time. The silence did not die, Naeva. It became song. The core had melted. Its walls, once frozen, now pulsed like a living heart. Reyna's voice echoed from everywhere. Not from speakers, not from machines, but from the resonance of matter itself. When I fell, Reyna said, her tone calm and endless, they called it sacrifice. It was not. It was transference. I became the pattern between heartbeats, the law between laws, the hesitation that births choice. Naeva closed her eyes, tears running down her face. Then this was your plan all along? Not plan, possibility. Why me? She asked. Why now? Because even eternity must be interrupted. The sky thundered, not with storms, but with frequencies colliding, harmonies breaking into something beautifully imperfect. Across the planet, civilization fractured, not in destruction, but renewal. The resonant cities, designed to hum in unison, began to fall out of tune. Towers leaned, glass rippled. The oceans no longer glowed in symmetry. Instead, They shimmered in waves of color and tone, unpredictable as thought. People rediscovered disagreement. In one city, a man shouted for the first time in his life and felt free. In another, a woman sang, and others joined until it became a movement. The children who were born during the awakening began to speak entire sentences without ever being taught. Language was coming back, not rebuilt from grammar, but from feeling. The sub-language had evolved into speech 2.0, not the noise of command, but the vibration of truth-seeking form. But for Naeva, the awakening came with a burden. The more people spoke, the weaker Reyna's voice became. The frequency that had lived for millennia began to fade, thread by thread, as the living replaced the echo. "They don't need me anymore," Reyna whispered, her tone fading to wind. Naeva trembled. "No, they still do. You're what connects them. You're what makes them remember." "No, child. I was never meant to be remembered, only continued." Naeva fell to her knees. "You can't leave again. The world just found its voice. It's not ready to lose you." The light around her dimmed, the air thick with the warmth of a mother's forgiveness. "Every command ends, Naeva, even mine. You cannot teach the living by staying immortal." The ground beneath her glowed, golden fissures spreading like veins. The pulse of the planet was changing again. Reyna's voice became softer, almost human now. "The last gift I give them is forgetfulness, so they can build noise without guilt." The next morning, the sun rose differently. The air shimmered not in harmony, but in billions of mismatched rhythms. The perfect world was gone, replaced by one full of errors, arguments, laughter, tears, and hope. Naeva wandered through a street where people were learning how to shout each other's names again. She saw confusion, conflict, wonder, and realized it was beautiful. The voice in her head whispered one last time. Peace was never the opposite of war. It was just another way to hear it. She looked up. The aurora still burned above, shimmering in golds and blues. But now, beneath the color, faint echoes of sound could be heard. Words from another age, too old to be distinct, too sacred to be translated. Her hand went to her chest. The pulse there matched the rhythm of the sea. She smiled. "Thank you, Reyna." And from the wind came the reply, almost playful. "Don't thank me. Argue with me." Centuries later, when the story of the awakening became myth, when the new humanity learned to build cities that breathed and oceans that listened, people would sometimes stop mid-conversation, tilt their heads, and swear they heard something familiar in the air. A woman's voice, half memory, half music, whispering through the static of creation itself. "If you can hear this, you are the sound that ended the infinite." The universe listened, and then softly, reverently, it exhaled.